afternoon, everyone. It is Sunday, August the 6th, and welcome to the Sports Note. And we're going to get right into it here. We actually had some fireworks in Cleveland, and not for their Rock and Blast events last night, where they have a rock concert after a Guardians game. But we actually saw the overflow of emotion and controversy coming out of the opener of the three-game set between the Chicago White Sox and the Cleveland Guardians. The White Sox, well under 500, well out of the playoffs. They're basically just playing for pride. Cleveland is still in a pennant race, however, even though they came in a game under 500 to that series, 2 games under 500, I'm sorry. We're still only within 3 games of the Minnesota Twins for the top spot in the American League Central, where those two teams were flipping back and forth, and the White Sox sold off some players at the trade deadline. The Guardians were well established to be one of the sellers. Did actually get both teams got a pretty good haul in terms of prospects coming back, but Cleveland actually ended up giving off their starting second baseman Ahmed Rosario and also one of their starting pitchers, Aaron Savale. And going into Friday night's game, a game that the Guardians ended up winning 4-2, we started to see some antics happening with Chicago's second baseman Tim Anderson. Now, Anderson was one of the players rumored to be dealt at the deadline, but the White Sox ended up holding on to him. In hindsight, after we get to what we're going to talk about here in a couple of minutes, they might want to rethink that decision, although he's not going to be around anyway for at least the next couple of weeks. Anderson had fielded a throw-in from right field after Cleveland rookie Brayan Rocchio, who was brought up to the majors after the Rosario trade to be their apparent second baseman or shortstop of the future, slid in head first, and Anderson had applied the tag, whereas Rocchio was well safe, and then the White Sox had challenged the call. The thinking was that Rocchio had taken his hand off the base and had been tagged out while Anderson still had the tag on. The idea to try and make this fly from Chicago manager Pedro Grifol was, to the naked eye, even before the replay, he was safe. But it was what happened after they had gone to replay is really what caused the fracas from Saturday night. And originally Rocchio was ruled safe, and then when they went to replay, he was ruled out. But what it showed that Anderson had pushed Rocchio's hand off the bag illegally after he had already made contact and was in a stopped motion, and then was ruled out. This basically set off the 30,000 plus that were in attendance at Progressive Field. It set off Cleveland manager Terry Francona. Francona ended up getting ejected. Francona also went down to the third base umpire and kind of proceeded to get in his face, whereas the idea of the third base umpire Malachi Moore had kind of just nonchalantly walked away after tossing Francona, after Francona had been tossed, I should say. And Francona is certainly going to get a fine and possibly a suspension for that alone, for maybe 1 game, for publicly criticizing Moore in the post-game interview, even though not by name. You could definitely tell who he was talking about, because, again, it was probably the most egregious call that I don't know what the replay booth in New York was looking at. Cleveland's TV and radio announcers both said it. The White Sox TV announcer even said it. Every one of the sports highlight shows, from CBS Sports HQ to ESPN to Fox Sports, everyone said this, that it was clear that he had pushed his hand off the bag, which was an illegal play. Fast forward to Saturday's action. Chicago's up 5-0, and Cleveland's MVP candidate, perennial MVP candidate, third baseman Jose Ramirez hits a sharp line drive down the first base line. He ends up scoring Gabriel Arias and to get Cleveland on the board. And then Anderson was at it again. The ball was thrown in from right field, and Anderson had made the tag, but with the way that he was standing in front of the plate as opposed to off to the side of it, Ramirez's momentum actually carried himself through Anderson's legs. So Anderson was kind of standing spread leg, kind of teepee form over Ramirez, had the tag on his lower back or his backside, and continued to hold the tag there. And Ramirez, at that point, could not get up. Time had already been called. It was clear that Ramirez was not going to slide through the bag at that point, as he stopped right about waist high over the top of the bag, so there's no way his momentum was going to carry his legs completely through, as there was enough of his body that would not have pushed him off the bag. And again, Anderson continued to hold the tag, and then as Ramirez turned over and looked to get up, he kind of held out his hand, and some people could think that he was asking, Anderson, what's up, or asking if Anderson could help him up, and neither was done. And then immediately Ramirez got up and stuck his finger in Anderson's face. Anderson responded by lip reading, saying, "You want to fight?" and Ramirez was more than happy to oblige. And Anderson ends up dropping his gloves, gets his hands up in fighting stance, throws a right hand that misses, that worst case, it might have grazed Ramirez, but it was the most clean shot he would have had, because Ramirez was actually being held back by Chicago's starting pitcher Michael Kopech. As the situation began to escalate, you saw the White Sox in the outfield start to move in to the plate that were actually out there defensively, I should say, not just outfielders. And then Ramirez, as he kind of got free of Kopech, threw a right hand where his face was basically looking down towards the dirt, and caught Anderson flush on the cheek, dropping Anderson and still showing that even when he's not looking, Jose Ramirez is still manageable to hit a lot more frequently than Tim Anderson is. And that was one of the running jokes out there. Some of the other memes I was seeing were the longest yard meme of Brucey getting knocked out, where he said, "I've got a bird, his name is Ronnie," and then Chris Rock standing over and saying, "Tell Ronnie you got knocked the fuck out." Joe Rogan memes from UFC. And to think that with WWE's SummerSlam event, the Jake Paul and Nate Diaz boxing fracas, and the AEW Collision event all going on at the same time in terms of hand-to-hand combat sports, it was Jose Ramirez, the most mild-mannered, respected, and possibly liked player in all of baseball, who landed the cleanest shot to floor a guy. If you have to set Jose Ramirez off, there's a problem. And again, this was Anderson being Anderson. He is to baseball what guys like Sean Avery were to the NHL. They're instigators. They're guys that try to get under your skin. But what he did Friday should not have flown. What he did Saturday was even more egregious, with the fact that he was the one that kind of instigated this, and also was told by the same umpiring crew from Friday night, was told to stop jaw-jacking at Arias earlier in the game. What exactly happened with that? Unfortunately, I did not catch the game to be able to see where it stemmed from, but he had to be warned, and then escalated it further. So when baseball hands out the suspensions, you're going to see both managers to probably get suspended for a couple of games. You're probably and for Francona, this was ejections on consecutive nights. You're going to see possibly Cleveland closer Emmanuel Clase get a game, as he was one kind of inflaming things after they seemed to calm down. You're going to see Cleveland third base coach Mike Sarbaugh probably get a game or two, as he actually started to make a run at one of the White Sox, either players or coaches, after things had simmered down. You saw one of the White Sox actually limping off at that particular at some point in that where he was slamming his fist down on the railing at the top of the dugout, and this was actually this was after the second time that Anderson had to be removed by his teammates back to the dugout. You actually saw Anderson had been kind of led away by three White Sox suited players or coaches, and then tried to get back on the field. And then you saw about two others come over and forcefully not only put him in the dugout, but start pushing him back up the tunnel to go to the locker room. You saw New Cleveland Indian Noah Syndergaard having to restrain Clase from getting back into that, and to the best of our knowledge, that the Anderson whiff and the Ramirez knockout were the only punches that were actually thrown. There might have been some pushing and shoving involved, but this is something where when baseball comes in, and Anderson was not dressed for Sunday's early noon start on Peacock, whereas Ramirez was. And Ramirez got massive ovations every time he came to the plate, and it was referenced multiple times on Cleveland radio during the broadcast. And but it's also an instance where you're going to see Ramirez probably get anywhere from 8 to 10 games, somewhere in there, 7 to 10 games. You might see Anderson broken off for 10 to 12, maybe 15 games, because his actions on Friday, and then also continuance of Saturday, and also with the fact that he was the instigator, may have actually caused this to spill over. And now it's starting to beg the question that what did Anderson actually say to Ramirez, or what did Anderson say to Arias that poured gasoline on this fire? And the other question that's got to be asked is, what was the better right hook? Was it Rougned Odor on Jose Bautista back in 2016, although Bautista only had his glasses knocked off? Or was it Ramirez knocking Tim Anderson square on his ass in the dirt at Cleveland? You notice there were no other White Sox that were around to be able to catch Anderson or stand behind him, because there's also talk that Anderson is not as well liked in his own dugout as some people may actually lead you on to believe. So it's also part of the reason why you think that Anderson may not have been moved, because he's only hitting .244 with a home run and 19 RBIs in 87 games. There's a reason for that. He's dramatically underperforming. A new change of scenery is not going to affect that, and he could end up being more of a locker room cancer, or nobody wants to deal with his shit, like how it was when Yasiel Puig was wearing out his welcome, not only in Cincinnati but in Los Angeles, and then he had a cup of coffee in Cleveland. So let me know what you guys think. What was the better shot? What do you think the suspensions are going to be for all parties involved? Mike and I will be back on Saturday night live at 9 p.m. with a new Wise Guys Sports Show. It will be the Big Rican 5-year anniversary extravaganza. Mike has not been able to do his Big Rican baseball show in a number of months since his relocation down to Georgia. So at least half of this episode is going to be reviewing the trade deadline, as we have not been on since before the deadline. We'll talk a little bit NFL. We'll actually talk some upcoming basketball. We'll talk some college football realignment craziness, and we will see you guys very, very soon. And there's a chance I might be back with you guys a little later on here this week. Take care.